The election is days away, and for some reason I left Canada to come back here. 2020 really is the year of poor decisions. But it's apparently also the year of grand delusions we tell ourselves, such as the fact that President Donald J. Trump will definitely see a day in prison for crimes committed during his time in office. In the entire history of the United States, only one American president has ever been arrested while in office, Ulysses S. Grant. Yeah, Grant was arrested for speeding in DC, and the cops let him go because they realized charging him would involve having to impeach him. American presidents don't get held accountable for crimes they commit during the course of their presidency because that would be so uncouth and against what being the president of the United States actually entails. Hey guys, I'm Sana. Mom, don't watch this because I will be discussing a famous sex act and why war crimes and separating families aren't real crimes when it comes to the American president. This past September, former Vice President and current presidential candidate Joe Biden was asked, if elected, if he would support the Department of Justice prosecuting Donald Trump. Echoing President Barack Obama's position on the Bush administration in 2009, Biden said he wouldn't stand in the way of the DOJ doing its job, but that it would be
a very, very unusual thing and probably not very, how can I say it, good for democracy to be talking about prosecuting former presidents.
Never has an American commander-in-chief been held accountable for his crimes. And why would he ever be? The political system in place, party protectionism, and the cult of prestige around the presidency ensure that the president never faces consequences for criminal action. A big reason why is because of what actually gets defined as criminal action. American presidents don't get held accountable for crimes they commit in the course of their presidencies because those aren't crimes. Those are just very difficult decisions they have to make. Bombing Cambodia? A difficult decision, but not a prosecutable war crime in this country. Invading Iraq and faking evidence? Difficult decision made in the fog of war, not a prosecutable war crime here. Oh, and you'll be rehabilitated anyways in like less than a decade. Secretly collecting the phone calls of millions of Americans without a warrant? Security measures. Kinda creepy, but not a crime. Assassinating American citizens, including a teenager abroad? Uneasy precedent setting, but not a crime. None of those are defined as crimes because those are protected by the authority given to the president by the American people when they vote for him. Actions we'd call crimes under international law are brave, sometimes unpopular decisions the president has to make, and decisions supported by the entirety of the political and military system. And so to think that President Donald J. Trump will ever end up in prison for separating families or his mishandling of the pandemic or really anything he's done while president is to completely reimagine not only this country's political history, but also the way in which power is protected by every institution and by bipartisan consensus. Okay, before you at me in the comments, yes, the United States isn't alone when it comes to not throwing their presidents in prison. Many countries like France, Iceland, Turkmenistan, and Fiji have laws barring the prosecution of their heads of states. It's worth noting that in 45 US presidents, only 3 have ever been impeached, and all were acquitted of any charges, including Donald Trump. Bill Clinton facing investigation and charges for lying about a blowjob instead of for bombing a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, which some speculate was in service of taking attention off said blowjob, is still my favorite remix. Richard Nixon resigning before being impeached for Watergate and never seeing a day in court or prison for the bloodshed he and Henry Kissinger spread across Southeast Asia is not my favorite remix. Now, I'm not saying American presidents can't end up in prison. An American president who commits crimes outside the scope of his presidency, crimes for which it cannot be argued he had any political authority, can end up in prison. There is no law, no enshrined privilege that excuses those crimes. But even indicting and prosecuting a former president would mean indicting and prosecuting a former president and creating a precedent that would make either political party in this country uncomfortable per Biden's earlier sentiments. Because what's wrong with prosecuting a president for criminal action? How is that bad for democracy, as Biden said, unless you consider the Pandora's box it opens for sitting and former presidents? But the Mueller report, Sana, it was so bad. We can't ignore that. The Mueller report is something that could come to bite Trump in the proverbial ass after his presidency, but it would require reopening the investigation to prove obstruction of justice or Russian collusion. That requires, along with evidence, political will from the same party that gave the president $4.6 billion to build the border wall while using children in cages for political posturing. And even then, Trump and his lawyers could argue executive privilege successfully, that he can't share certain information even in an investigation because it's confidential and the safety of the country is at stake. Then there's the whole pardon thing. There's also the possibility that before leaving office, whenever that happens, President Trump pardons himself in a sweeping presidential pardon that would make anyone implicated in the Mueller investigation immune to further investigation and prosecution. Yeah, he can do that. May not be easy, but he can do it. And any criminal charges brought against him regarding crimes committed outside the presidency would not only require that they be within a statute of limitations, but also a lot of other political considerations. If Wall Street bankers and traders can walk scot-free after destroying millions of lives, stealing billions of dollars, and tanking the global economy, I think the pursuit of criminal prosecution against a former president would require some extra thought. And finally, there's the mantle of the presidency. I'm old enough to remember when this guy, George W. Bush, was called a fascist openly, when he was the butt of every joke, when his demeanor was called unpresidential at every turn, and people rallied for him to be thrown into prison. And today? So many people look back fondly at his bloody, civil rights violating, doesn't care about black people tenure as better days. Hell, even the man who built the legal framework for the war on terror's use of torture, John Yoo, is currently a law professor at the liberal bastion known as Berkeley, when he should be sitting at The Hague along with the rest of the administration.
Professor Yoo is quoted as saying that under certain circumstances it would be proper and legal to torture a detainee's child to get necessary information.
So what actually keeps Donald J. Trump immune from that rehabilitation? Nothing. He hasn't done anything to upset the most powerful class in this country. The response to the pandemic, the one that's cost over 200,000 American lives, it initiated one of the biggest wealth transfers in recent history. The wealth of the richest Americans has increased as over 8 million more Americans have been pushed into poverty. The Trump administration oversaw all of that. They oversaw an overhaul of immigration, forced family separations, and allegations of forced hysterectomies that we've collectively moved on from. They've overseen deploying a loyalist paramilitary unit, Customs and Border Patrol, against protesters in Portland, and they've overseen the open and unabashed emboldening of white supremacy, among everything else. But as soon as he got COVID-19, even his loudest, consistent critic, who spent years accusing him of every crime, wished him a speedy recovery. Who holds that man accountable? And for what crime is he held accountable when every crime is a decision made in service of this country? Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. As we're about to enter a new political era in this country, regardless of who wins, we want to know what are some other topics you want us to cover. Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you very soon.